Hey guys, how are y'all doing? Yes, indeed, it is another mage build. No, the Age of Mage was not just a spooky season thing, it's still going on. But this is not just any ordinary mage build, it is yet another of my Dark Souls 3 builds that I've taken and evolved into a mage in Elden Ring. Those of you with great insight and long memories might recall one of my favorite fucked up little guys from the catacombs of Carthus, a sweetly rotting skeleton man known as Rotting Iosiah. But here in Elden Ring, he is now known as Sanguine Iosiah, a depraved perfumer who has come to serve the Lord of Blood. You might think that the connections between these two are a little loose, but let me elaborate. As always, bear with me here as I'm going to ramble a bit about the usual Rofo things like lore, aesthetics, and general thought process of the build before I get into any real explanations about what makes this particular invader tick. In the meantime, here are the stats and gear. This is a rune level 63 build with plus 12 and plus 5 weapons, with the bandit starting class. I personally would not recommend starting with the bandit starting class, just because that is a starting class that is hard to make into anything else except a dex and arcane build. So in Dark Souls 3, Rotting Iosiah guarded the graves of fallen warriors as a member of the Watchdogs of Theron, one of the few watchdogs with his brain still half intact that knew not to attack his co-invaders. Originally in Elden Ring, I was going to have this guy be like a red mane, and have them guard the graves of all of the fallen warriors from the Shattering War. But in the last couple of months, I've really been going down the whole Quelaag lore rabbit hole, learning about how the ruins that the Mohg dynasty currently inhabit date it as likely one of the oldest locations in Elden Ring. And so I feel like it's a spiritual progression to go from guarding the graves and ruins of Dark Souls 1's Darkroot Garden and Dark Souls 3 to guarding the ruins of the past civilizations of the lands between. That all being said, I do spend most of my time with this build in Leyndell in the Altus Plateau, mostly due to the level and matchmaking ranges that I'm at, but also because I get to spend plenty of time with my other Perfumer brethren. Also back in Dark Souls 3, I had this philosophy that the best way to make a poison or bleed build was to find a weapon with innate poison or bleed, make a dex build around said weapon, and then just apply the corresponding rotten pine resin or Carthus rouge. That way you would get both the damage of a dex build, but also effective status building. And it was also because the damage on luck builds had been so thoroughly nerfed into the ground that they were almost always outclassed by simple strength or dex builds. And that's why Rotting Iosiah in Dark Souls 3 was a dex build with the Rotten Brew Curve Sword that would apply rotten pine resin to their weapon. So then in Elden Ring, I had the same idea, but for a mage, kind of. My plan was to get most of my spell damage from dexterity via the Frenzied Flame Seal, and I would hit 35 dexterity and 19 arcane, allowing me to use Morgoth's Curved Sword and Eleonora's Pole Blade, and then I would use all of that dexterity to get boosted damage and quicker cast times. This was a terrible idea. I don't know why I thought this would work. Bad idea. Don't do this. So then I threw all of that in the trash and just spec fully into Arcane as my damage stat, threw Morgoth's stupid walking stick sword in the trash, and only then, much like Mohg embracing his cursed blood, did I realize that the true path forward was through a spell-oriented bleed build, getting both my physical damage and my spell damage through Arcane. This actually turned out to be sort of effective. Anyways, now on to the weapons and the spells that this build uses. Oh, hang on. I have a voicemail here from my friend Fel. What does he have to say?
Hey Rofo, it's your friend Fel here. Look, we're all here because we care about you, and we need to talk about your problem, man, your mage problem. When I first met you, Rofo, you were, not good at the game in the slightest, but you had heart. You swung your little greatsword around at hosts and poked and prodded at them with that tiny little crystal sage rapier. You were having fun, full of life and malice in your eyes for the people that you fought. You played the game the way it was meant to be played, with actual swords and weapons, not this blue raspberry flavored pain you've been obsessed with lately. But now look at you. Your content, man, it's really gotten unhinged. Your last several videos have been about shapes and stars and bugs. The other day I popped my head into your Discord just to see how you were doing, but it was just you ranting and raving to yourself about how much you hate melee combat, how you're gonna discard your corporeal form and live untethered among the stars. I mean, Jesus fucking Christ, dude, listen to yourself. But hey, we're not trying to be negative here. We're all here for you. maybe pick up that Flamberge that you used to like so much, just for old time's sake. And you know, maybe it's about the people you hang out with, too. You know, I see you from time to time in Dashing's stream, typing all caps, use the bubbles, Dashing, use the Haima spells, shoot that guy in the face with the night comment, over and over. Dashing was just being nice and ignoring your comments, but once you left the stream, it was clear how relieved he was that you were gone. But he's too nice to say that. And I saw you in Ghost Hardware's chat the other day, typing fireball, 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 every time you cast Giant's Flame Take Thee. And I'm gonna be honest, it's really hard to be associated with you these days when you keep acting like that. Oh god, right. We're not trying to be negative, right? Look, take care of yourself, buddy. You'll snap out of this funk soon enough. Or you won't, and you'll just turn into a big ball of crowns.
Well, hey, I don't think that's entirely fair, Fel. I don't have any sort of problem. This is just an enthusiasm, a hobby. Sort of like how Dark Souls 2 fans are very rational people and can accept criticism of their game, I can stop making mage builds whenever I please. It's just a phase, I promise. I'll grow out of it. Anyways, the build, right, the build. The main weapon on this build is the Bloody Hellas. It's like the least sweaty, heavy thrusting sword. Or maybe it's the most sweaty. I'm not entirely sure. Either way, it has the kind of Ash of War that I love having on a mage build. The kind that lets you neutralize pressure. It doesn't really stop anyone in their tracks like Flaming Strike or have substantial hyper armor like the Onyx Lord's Greatsword. But it does have excellent iframes and a follow-up that hits hard. Also, it has a follow-up R2 to the follow-up R2 that's like a couple of slashes and pokes. But being a mage, I know that I'm extremely squishy due to the frequent use of Sword Seals, so I don't love committing to tons of attacks with long animations, and thus there are no clips of me using it to be found. The Bloody Hellas doesn't have the best synergy in the world with this build, but it does cause bleed buildup and scales directly off of Arcane and a little bit from Dex, so it works well in my book. I would have loved to have gone back to something that sort of resembles the Rotten Brew Curved Sword, but the only thing that has the same kind of grunge to it is the Scavenger Sword, and I'm for sure not using that weapon going forward. Besides, there's only like 2 of the small, fun curved swords in the game, and the Shamshir is better in every way than the Scimitar, and it just doesn't fit quite as well as I wanted to with the aesthetic of this build. I still use it, but it's not my main weapon. So yeah, kinda out on curved swords for my gross little skeleton guy. But I have carried over one crucial aspect of Rotting Iosiah to Sanguine Iosiah, that being his ability to apply poison. And the best way to do that in this game is through poison pots. They scale with Arcane, and at 30 Arcane, it takes exactly 1 hit from a pot to proc the poison. It's kinda ridiculous, but also quite useful at the same time. The steady, constant drain of poison creates another factor that your opponents have to consider while fighting you. It also gives you space while your opponents back off to dig through their inventory to find the necessary boluses to heal the poison. And even in rare cases, it sometimes also does just enough to finish off the opponent you whittled down to low health. Now, you might be wondering how this particular character is a Perfumer, as I've mentioned before, and not just some weird, inefficient bleed build, which it definitely is. I do use perfumes, 2 of them actually. Well, only one is actually useful, but from time to time I use the other one too. The useful one is of course the Spark Aromatic, which was actually going to be one of my main sources of damage when I was first conceptualizing this build. That too was a very bad idea. My issue with the Spark Aromatic is that it has a bit of a long windup, not a ton of range, and a delayed hitbox that doesn't necessarily stop players who are in the process of attacking you. That being said, the Spark Aromatic also hits like a truck, has a lingering hitbox, scales with dexterity, and is also boosted by the Flame Shrouding Tear that I include in this build's physic. What it's really, really good at though is turn and burns, literally. Just turn around and give them a little spritz. I've also found it chips through shields quite well too. It's basically a cheap pyromancy that scales with a dexterity. What's not to like about that? And hey, the Elden Ring Twitter account decided to talk a little bit about the Spark Aromatic on Tuesday, so that's cool too, I guess. The other perfume here is the Poison Spray Mist, which is sadly not very good, almost entirely due to its uncomfortably long cast speed. If you're able to land the Spray Mist, it actually deals more damage over time than Scarlet Rot. It has its own weird version of deadly poison that is faster than all of the other poisons, but again, hard to land. Now, I do know there are other much more useful perfumes out there that I could use, like, say, Uplifting Aromatic. However, I wanted to make a point of not using them for this build because they require items that are limited to a per playthrough basis, like the Arteria Leaf. And I wanted to show people who don't have access to friends who will drop them a million of each crafting material how to make these kind of builds too. And in a way, the perfumes I just went over are kind of like spells for melee builds. So you could make the case that perfumes are all parts of a more melee-focused mage's arsenal. But let's move on to what makes this build really tick, and that of course is the same thing that makes it a mage. It's spells. And to aid with this, I've invited a special guest to come speak to you guys about being a mage in Elden Ring.
Greetings, dearest viewer of Rombo the Gorm. It is I, Pure Platinum Prynne, here to talk to you today on the strange mania which grips this particular content creator. You see, in a hilarious farce, this poor creature seems to believe that he has become a mage in recent weeks, and I'm sure he's babbling on and on about how effective this mage is, or something inane about its aesthetics. Well, I will say that the most impressive part about this video is how it toes directly up to the line of effectiveness as a build, and then steps no further. Now, you may be thinking that Robo the Gruyere has picked something up from all the mages that post in his Discord, but I can assure you that he has far exceeded our expectations in his relative decency. You see, dear viewer, Ragu the Grim might appear to be a mage. He might dress like a mage with the odd pointed cap or two, and sometimes he might even cast more than 2 spells. But I can assure you, that does not truly make him a mage. It needs be remarked that I too enjoy dabbling in the melee arts from time to time. Indeed, a rustic pastime of these games. But it is nothing more than a tawdry exercise in horseplay, rather than the elevated art of performing genuine magic. If it would please me, I would refer you to a great many tomes of spells, and even an odd incantation or two, that you too could one day master the arcane arts. But alas, it does not please me in the slightest, and I am assured that viewers of Ratio the Groom are not but gormless rubes, who I dare say would not be let within 20 yards of a fine institution like Rea Lucaria. Oh, how the time flies. That is all from me today. Class dismissed. Ta-ta!
Well, I was hoping that would be an informative lecture about magic, but no, that was just a steady stream of snide insults. So, God damn it, you guys. First I'm too mage-brained, and now I'm not magey enough. Seems that once again I have been gaslit, gate-kept, and girl-bossed by my magician friends. But whatever, we're pressing on with this mage build, despite the protests from the peanut gallery. Moving on. I only have 14 faith on this build, so I'm fairly limited to what I can cast, but the vast majority of what I can use are fire pyromancies, and thus boosted by my physic, so the damage is still quite high. First on the docket is Catch Flame. You know what Catch Flame does. It's fast, it's spammable, it's got nice running attack and hit stun, you know the drill. As the Mountaintop Giant's prophecy once predicted, those that wish to catch hands will inevitably catch flame. Next we have the most surprisingly useful spell, Pest Threads. I've long lamented that Faith Mages are far less effective than Intelligence Mages due to incantations as a whole, seemingly relying too much on large, bombastic spells that cost exorbitant amounts of FP in exchange for massive damage. However, these spells are often quite easily dodged, and have no ability to really harass and corral your opponents like sorceries do. But this changes with Pest Threads. Look, Pest Threads is not actually good. It will not hit hard, ever. Ever. But that's not the point. The point is to get your opponents to move around, to have to focus on this spell's insane tracking instead of whatever you're doing. And you're also betting that they have some residual PTSD from getting warped to Celia Crystal Cave early on in their playthrough, and getting completely obliterated by the Kindred of Rot's own Pest Threads in that cave. And while your opponents are focusing on dodging the threads or reliving traumatic flashbacks, you close the gap and hit them with something else. That's the real point of this spell, but that's the point of all harassment spells. A distraction to keep your opponents occupied before you smack them across the face with the attack that you actually wanted to land. And because we are Sanguine Iosiah, you know we've been properly spec'd out for all of the Lord of Blood spells. That being Blood Bloon, goddammit, Blood Boon, Blood Flame Talons, and Swarm of Bees. Blood Boon, you guys know, I've talked about it before in my Briar's build, but the only real update here is that I've gotten dramatically better at free aiming it. And in my mind, there is no reason you should ever cast the spell while locked on. Either free aim your camera up to sling it long distances, or free aim your camera down to create a nice healthy patch of Blood Flame right in front of you for your opponent to walk into. But the new one I've started to use more is Blood Flame Talons. Now in the past I've had beef with this spell because I don't like that it's a delayed explosion and felt like the casting speed was too slow. But on this build I have 23 dexterity plus the extra 30 virtual dexterity from the Radagon icon, and thus my spellcasting speed is fast enough where I now love this spell. Chain casting it many times in succession is now a viable strategy, creating a series of explosions right in front of your face that punishes your opponent's aggression and eventually leads to their bleed out. All of this combines together to create an onslaught of spells and perfumes that do substantial fire damage, while also inflicting the blood flame and poison status effects, followed by the ability to escape and immediately counterattack with the Bloody Hellas, which we should also note also builds up bleed. So yeah, this build kind of did a 180 in my view. I very quickly went from hating this build and wanting to delete it to loving it the moment I switched over to fully commit to the Arcane Incantation caster. This build isn't the most original concept I've come up with, but I'm very pleased with its aesthetics and how it feels like another successful evolution of one of my favorite characters from Dark Souls 3. So yeah, that's really all I have to say about this build. It's fun, it's a spooky, smelly skeleton man, and it feels like the most honest version of a bleed build I've made thus far. But the only other thing I really have to say is thank you guys, because I recently hit 1,000 subscribers over this last weekend, which absolutely blows my mind. I think I'm less excited about this number and more so just excited that this Elden Ring community is really coming along, and that yeah, there's been some losses of momentum going from Dark Souls 3 and what that game was and what that game meant to us to Elden Ring, which is just a very different type of game. And it's better in some ways and disappointing in others, but it's its own thing. And I'm understanding of those who just didn't want to play this game, but I'm happy for those who have stayed despite it not being the game that you really wanted. And I'm even happier that there's more and more people joining our community, joining our groups of fucked up little guys, all talking about our funny little invaders and lore builds, and I'm thankful for that. So that's kind of really all I wanted to say about that. But since I hit 1,000 subscribers, I now can monetize. I'm raking in the big bucks, that's right, all 2 figures. But most importantly, now on this channel, we have sponsors. So our sponsor today is Audible. Oh wait, no, it's not Audible. No, it's some other company I haven't heard of before. Can we just roll this ad already? Let's roll it.
Attention all Elden Ring gamers. Rofo the Gurm is suffering from a complete mage-induced brain rot, and he needs your help to purge the slugs from his skull. To do this, he needs to run the most efficient $50 tournament winning build. He's going to have to subscribe to G9's Patreon in order to access the definitive Elden Ring weapon tier list for invasions, and we all know that's a tier 3 sub. To help him, all he needs is your credit card number, the expiration month and date, and the 3 numbers on the back. But you gotta be quick. The dual bike user and his barrier of gold buff friend are closing in on Rofo as we speak. Help him out fast, otherwise he'll never become an Elden Lord. All business inquiries should be directed towards myself, Noname Tryhard, CEO of Dropcorp Industries. We are not liable for any and all Starlight Shards or Atrea Leaves falling into the hands of armed and dangerous terrorists at Academy Gate Town.